Disney. It also has the every month the interview with Lee Miltier and various people. It has the full packet of information. In this case, it was how to stand out from a crowd with Zach Miller. You also have in here the RSVP for the Quick Start meeting coming up in Colorado, coming up quickly, July 24th and 25th. And the structure is Thursday night, see behind the scenes at one of our schools here, Friday and Saturday here at my home. Typically, we go across the street to one of the restaurants over here for lunch, and then get done maybe 7-ish on both days, 6 or 7. You also had in here the video schedule for the year, which really only expect that they're ongoing unless it's a holiday of some sort, U.S. holiday. We don't cancel them for Canadian holidays, unfortunately, Scott. But anyway, but interestingly, they mostly overlap. So, and then we have the all of the meetings for the year. Some of them subject to change, but the Disney meeting, the high-intensity staff recruiting, hiring, training process meeting, and then behind the scenes, first at Disney World and then at Annapolis. Matt Smith, I was just showing everybody the package that they should have gotten, unless they're just brand spanking new, but everybody else should have gotten that before the first of the month, more or less. And then what again, to reiterate, we're using this as a guide today.
And Mr. Oliver, if I could jump in real quick, anybody who's not getting that packet, obviously the guys that just came on board probably won't see it right away, but let me know so I can update the address and make sure that you guys are getting that. Just feel free to give me a call.
Yeah, if you don't get it more or less around the first of the month, in any month, let us know, because we're mailing it out every month. And it'll always have the RSVP forms for the upcoming meetings and, announcements, as well as all the Lee Miltier material as well.
Yeah, and let me share what you're talking about, Master Oliver. This is the file. This is the one that you should be really, if you have it and you're looking at it on the Facebook group. We won't keep sharing it, but this is the page.
Why don't you keep sharing it there?
Okay, I'll leave it up there.
I think it's probably useful. And then I also want to address some staff development things, because there's been a common thread of some of the smaller schools asking questions. And let me touch on it briefly, and then we'll come back to it if we have time. Is if you're a single school owner operator, the worst place to be is to be the head instructor in your school. Is you want to be the master teacher, but you've got to have a full-time head instructor who is there for all the classes. And there's two, and I'm just going to make this like 2 seconds, but the common objection is, I don't have enough revenue to pay somebody what they need to be paid to be full-time, or I just don't have anybody that I can hire. And there's solutions to both of those things, obviously. But I've done it when and this is, example from probably the 80s. In fact, it is mid-80s. But I've had it where I had to literally go into one of the branches, fire all the full-time staff, and have gone in with a full-time branch manager, and then staffed it up with 4 high school kids. And it worked out just fine as an intermediate step. In fact, 3 of the 4 ended up being full-time for me as soon as they graduated from high school. One of them went off to Harvard. But basically what I did in that case is I had 4, high school kids, various ages. Mostly they were, junior, seniors. 4 high school kids. And the conversation with them was, 1 is 2 of you have to be here for every class. 2 is all of you have to talk every day, because I want you to review everybody in every class, because you guys are collectively in charge of exam, graduation schedules, renewal schedule, and retention. So we're going to have a conversation every day with me and the 4 of you, or the branch manager and the 4 of you. And 2 of you have to be here for every class. And my preference is that's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday schedule, with perhaps some overlap. And that actually worked out pretty well for a while. One of our members had asked about, paying a really good instructor per class. And this tends to be kind of the MMA, BJJ guys think this way. I've got a great guy and he's a fighter and he's so good, and I pay him $50 for the Tuesday and Thursday class at 7. That's a really bad idea. And it's always a really bad idea. One is the only one you really want put on a pedestal is yourself, and then your full-time staff. Second is getting people to where they think about they're getting paid per class as opposed they're getting paid for a broader period of time, and having responsibility and accountability is a bad way to think about things.
Well, and getting paid per class also implies that they're only there to teach, and there's a lot of other things in our school that they should be, when you said accountable, they are responsible, even when they're teaching class, to make sure these people follow through, that they show up for their next class, and that ultimately they renew and they stay with us and they're paying their bills. So nobody should ever be just an instructor ever. That's just that's silly.
Yeah, well, and especially you can never let them think that their role is to teach the technical aspects. Their role is retention, testing progress, referrals, renewal. The purpose of the teaching process is, of course, to create tremendous martial artists, but that goes far beyond the technical into the developmental, and it goes far beyond the technical into the relationship and the educational role. And the educational role is to make sure that they're thrilled, that they're not fading, that they're testing on time, that they're we have some other background noise there. I'm not sure where it's coming from. Bob, if you can.
Yes, sir. I'm trying. It's hard when we got a screen share happening to monitor everybody. But.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay. You got a good point. Okay. But we'll come back to that. But I just want to point out, if you're an owner or operator and you're teaching most of the classes, you've got to get out of that. And you got to get out of it like January 10th, like right now. That doesn't mean you abdicate teaching. You can delegate teaching and have your hand in it, but you've got to be free to do enrollments. You've got to be free to do renewals. You've got to be free to do mat chats with parents. You've got to be free to really have the pulse of the school. And the worst place to be able to really drive the results of the school is being stuck on the floor for all of the classes. But we're going to cycle back to that. What I do want to do, and this is going to be admittedly long-winded, and I'm going to be talking fast and long here, and I want nobody to be afraid of speaking up, asking questions, jumping in. But I don't want to get too diverted here. Number one on this, 10 things you must do to thrive. And this is where myself, Mr. Dunn, Grandmaster Smith, Senior Master Moody, where we all sound like a broken record. To the extent that I've heard people, Tony said this to me this week, all you guys want me to do is raise my prices. Well, yeah, not all we want to do, but one of the things we want to do is to get to a better price point with the students. And it's an essential and important part of making the whole operation work. If you're going to have staff who are getting well compensated, better compensated than their other opportunities out there in the market, and compensated well enough that this is a career path, not just something they do because they love the physical aspect of martial arts, you've got to have enough revenue in order to compensate them well. The second element is you've got to have enough revenue per student, because that revenue per student impacts a lot of things. And whether we're talking about the lifetime value, which we want to be in the $6,000, $7,000 range, or whether we're talking about the average monthly revenue, which we want to be in the $250 to $300 range, you have to have enough revenue per student that, one, your student-teacher ratio stays intact. There was, Howard Schultz had a great quote in one of the interviews that I read with him. If you don't know who he is, he's the founder of Starbucks. And one of the quotes was, he said, the reason we charge so much for a cup of coffee is that we can highly compensate our staff. And Starbucks is in the fast food business. McDonald's is in the fast food business. Last I knew, and this may not be an accurate number right now, but last I knew, McDonald's was turning over staff at 300%, meaning the average person lasted 4 months. And at Starbucks, the average person lasted 1.5 years. If you have that kind of disparity in a business like fast food, it affects everything. It affects your training costs. It affects your customer relationships. It affects the happiness and the well-being of the staff. It affects how they behave with people. So it's one of those quotes that you want to keep in mind is the reason to have a high value per student is, number one, so you can have quality people working for you who get paid better than their comparable opportunities in the market, who can view this as a career opportunity. The second reason you want to have that is it makes a massive impact on your marketing decisions. Let me give you an extreme example. I have a cardio kickboxing program that I'm charging $75 a month, and I'm also dumb enough to have a punch card where somebody can buy 10 sessions or 12 sessions or whatever. But let's stick with the $75 a month. The $75 a month, and on average, they're dropping out at a third per month, 33% per month. So therefore, I turn over the entire program in 3 months. You can extrapolate from that the average person that I enroll is worth $225. Now, the question is, how many of those do I need to have coming in every month to ever get this to be a viable program? Well, if I want to have 300 of them, which only is 25,000 in revenue, if I want to have 300 of them turning into not a great revenue for that, I've got to have 100 new ones every month. I've got to interact with 100 new ones every month. I've got to do enrollment conference with 100 new ones every month. I've got to do all that kind of stuff. Number two, how much can I spend if I know over the entire lifetime value that individual is going to pay in $225 to the school? Well, I couldn't pay $200 to get an enrollment because that would be essentially everything that they're going to pay over the lifetime of their enrollment. I might be willing to pay $20, but I'd be kind of hard pressed on a regular basis to generate 100 new people at $20 a piece to make that even seem like a viable program. Does that example make sense to everybody? But if I know that each new student I'm going to enroll is going to be worth $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, then I'm not shy at all about spending $500, $750, $1,000 to get one, right? But also what I know is a school of 300 students becomes $1 million a year school. Well, if I have $1 million a year school, I got plenty of money to go around for a strong payroll so I can pay good people well. I've got enough structure so that I can have a really good student-teacher ratio. I've got enough resources that I can provide a lot of resources for people, right? So the reason why we're a broken record on this is almost anyone we talk to immediately coming in, they can double their gross and have almost all of the increase be net profit purely by being smarter on program structure and pricing. So if I can get a school to go from $30,000 a month to $60,000 a month with no increase in expenses whatsoever, what's going to happen is a chunk of that is going to go to payroll. Everybody working for them is going to be happier. And the rest of it is going to go to net profit, right? Because if you're already at a point where you're breaking even and you're making a little bit of money, all the rest of that is net profit except for putting it back into the people working for you, meaning they're making more money. Does that make sense? So anyway, I'm not going to belabor any one of these points, but I want to do this as a checklist. What you really need to do is do the mental catharsis, start the new year. Where am I that we have some opportunity here to massively grow our school? The reason why we're all a broken record on this is for some reason, and I attribute it in a negative sense to low self-esteem. The one thing that we have a hard time getting martial artists to internalize is, one, that it doesn't matter what anybody else in Nashville or in Tulsa or in Mankato, Minnesota, or in Harlem, in Manhattan, in Topeka, Kansas, or wherever. Doesn't matter what anybody else is charging in that area. One is we're not in an industry where it's difficult to be the best in an area because most of them aren't very good. Number two, if we do our marketing properly, which is what we're teaching you, you rarely have anybody who shops the competition. So three is there's an emotional factor, unlike anything else that we do. There's an emotional factor where people just can't get their head around that what they're teaching is worth a higher tuition than what they're currently charging, but their only reference point for what they're paying is what their background is and where they came up from. Does that make sense? Any questions or thoughts on this, Master Smith, Master Moody?
Master Oliver, if you mentioned something earlier in the call that maybe some of the newer members have haven't been able to understand the importance or the value of, and that was when you said that the average student value should be in the minimum 250 to 300 per student range. You might want to walk through everybody, because if you have a $300 student value and you have 200 students and you're a $60,000 school, a 250 value, then that's going to give you a $50,000 school with those 200. So that's how we can get $1 million school up to speed. When you get to 300 students, you're $1 million school. So maybe you could explain for some of the newer members who don't know how to calculate what their student value is now, because it'll surprise a lot of people because it's less than what your normal monthly is. Could you explain that to them?
Well, sure. I mean,
It's simple.
There's two simple calculations. One simple calculation is just take your average monthly gross, and right now, going back to 2019, this is easy. What did you do for the entire year? Divide by 12. Divide that into what or divide that by what your average active student count was. And that's the average revenue per month per person who's active in your school. Okay? Don't do it from the ACH reports. This is actually actively training students, right? So if I have 150 students and I gross 30,000 a month, 150 divided into 30 is 200. Simple calculation. We want to get that to 250 to 300 average revenue per student. Now that's the aggregation of enrollment down payments, monthly tuition coming from enrollments, renewal down payments, monthly aggregated tuition coming from renewal payments, paid in fulls, plus anything else, retail, test fees, any of that stuff, right? Really, all I care about is tuition, down payments, monthly, paid in full. All the other stuff is fairly irrelevant. But we want to get where the tuition number is in that 250 to 300 range or more. Higher is better. But again, that doesn't mean you have to be charging $300 a month for a new enrollment, although I'd like for you to be. But what it certainly means that by the time you enroll them and then you renew them and you put it all together, you want to get that average in the 250 to 300 range. The other number, which is easy to compute right now at the end of the year, is go back for the last year. What was your total gross? And then go back for the last year and look at how many new students you enrolled. And I'm talking about normal enrollments on a 12-month agreement, whatever, right? Not it's a 1-month trial offer. If you divide the total gross by the number of new students you brought in, that gives you an approximation for average lifetime value. The average lifetime value is more or less what they're going to spend with you from the day they enroll to the point at which they leave for whatever reason they leave. They enrolled for the year, they never renew, they leave, they enroll and then they renew. They're there for 7 years, what the aggregate of that is, but it averages it all out. So what I'd like to have is everyone who enrolls is going to spend $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 with me over their lifetime. That's the total gross divided by the number of enrollments. The second thing is I'd like the average monthly revenue to to be in the range of 250 to 300. More would be better, but no less than that 250 range. So far, so good?
And if somebody is charging even just 200 on a basic program and they're renewing them at just 300, then it's very easy to get your student value to that 250 that we're talking about. So that's why when you're in that 300 for a basic or 400 or 500 for a black belt renewal, now that's where you're even able to get that monthly student value to even higher than 300. But we like to use that 250, 300 number because we know that everybody is capable of reaching that regardless of what their price point is right now, as long as they're in our minimum, which is a 200, and a black belt renewal, which is a minimum of a 300 or 400.
Yeah. So anybody have any questions on that before I go to point 2? Because we have 10 of these. No?
The only thing I'd add on to what you guys are saying is this is an order. So a lot of times what we get is people cycling around of, well, I'll up the price when I do the next steps that we're going to follow here in a little bit. And it's an order. Just raise your price. You don't have to like create a whole bunch of new stuff or, paint the whole school, remodel.
I'll raise the price when we move the location. I'll raise the price when I have full-time, not part-time staff. I'll raise the price when the staff are better trained. I'll raise the price when we've implemented the character lessons that you guys are suggesting. I'll raise the price when my competitors raise the price. I'll raise the price when we have a real substantive program beyond just, no. You just raise the price. Now,
I think that can be confusing. So don't get that confused with the next 9 things we're going to say. It's not do all 10 at once. I mean, you got to do all 10. Don't get me wrong, but you don't do number 1 here. This is what people will stress out about. Just do number 1. It's independent of all the rest of the crap. And then, so I just wanted to follow up with that because the next one can confuse people. I got to do these other things first before I can raise prices. No, you're just charging too little. Just fix it.
Yeah. And certainly there are a lot of things that we'll teach along the way, and I can give you kind of a quick checklist of ways that you'll create a higher perception of value for people in the first intro or 2, so that they see that this is more than just kicking and punching, and you shift it from this is something to do between baseball and soccer to this is a more life-changing activity. A simple example is load them up with testimonials. The most powerful way to do that is capture them on video, and then you can burn the audio to MP3, and then you can transcribe it. And now if I go get powerful video feedback about the quality of the program, I can hand out DVDs, I can text a link to YouTube or wherever that has little video clips. I can have them transcribed and I can hand them a packet of written testimonials. I can put the written testimonials on the website. I can email those out. I can text them out. I can burn them to a CD and give them an audio CD. I can burn it to a DVD and give them a video. And by the way, which of those would I do? I do all of them, right? So there's things to look at as you go about how do I make the introductory process more robust? How do I really prove the value and the outcome for the school? How do I really validate it through third-party testimonial and so forth? And again, don't wait to do that. Let's just make sure your sales process is tight, and let's get the new enrollment process going at a higher tuition level. And then we're going to talk about getting the renewal process down. And that's a conversation for another day. What our frame of reference is, whatever the tuition is for a new enrollment, the leadership program can be double or more. I've yet to get anybody to push that too far. And then have a fallback of, let's say, call it Black Belt Club, but have a Black Belt fallback that's maybe a 50% bump, perhaps a tick less. So when you price some people out of the market of being able to do leadership, there's a fallback. Some of our more advanced schools are saying, well, everybody's renewing the leadership, so I got rid of the fallback. Well, my answer to that in every case that I've heard so far is they just weren't pushing the price point of leadership high enough. If you push it high enough, you're going to have some that aren't going to go with that. That's fine. I don't want to push them out the door. I want to have a fallback that they can go to. But anyway, let's go to.
Explain what you mean by fallback, because that sounds like a negative connotation. Not fallback as in a lot of disgruntled people, but explain that, Mr. Oliver.
Quickly, what I mean when we start talking about the renewals, which is for a different day, is we want to be able to predominantly sell leadership, and if that's out of their price point, have a lower tuition level option so that they're still committed to train to black belt, but not at the higher price point, at a little bit less price point. In reality,
if you don't have the middle option, you can't push the price point of leadership high enough.
correct. And in reality, by the way, I designed all this for about half of the people who renew to do leadership and about half of them to do the Black Belt Club. In reality, and this is going back, I don't know how many years now, we've typically been in the 75 to 95% range of students renewing directly into the more expensive option, into the leadership option, rather than into the less expensive option. And with our own schools, with our own franchisees, I keep having to have the conversation. That means that you just haven't got the balls enough to charge what we should be charging for leadership. So again, even at the double it price point, we're still getting between 75 and 95% going into leadership. Okay, so let's go to point two. Point two is focus internally first. Is what anybody and everybody, with minor exceptions, seems to come to us for immediately is in their mind is, if I just had 10 more students a month, if I just had 20 more students a month, if I could just go from 80 students to 150, from 150 to 300, everything else would be fine. Well, we've already talked about price point, and in almost all cases, in fact, I think in all cases, is the value per student is usually pretty bad. And we typically shift gears no matter what the person said they wanted and say, let's first fix the value per student and let's fix your sales process, and then we can start getting more people coming in the door. Because it doesn't do any good for us to add 100 students at the crappy price point you started with, right? But the second thing is you need to look internally at your school and make sure that you only have friendly people, that you're building a high level of rapport with new students, that you're really looking at the school, saying to yourself, not just how proud I am of these 3 black belts, but what am I doing with all of our beginner students to really help them develop their fullest potential, to really help them develop their character, their ability to interact with people, to create a high level of comfort, to have them be, as Schultz said, he wanted Starbucks to be that 3rd place. We really want the martial arts school to be that place where they go feel safe, where they're excited, where they feel like they're learning and growing, where they just can't wait to see the staff, where they can't wait to see the other students. And so many times, we have a school that's dirty. We have people who are maybe technically gifted, but they're not particularly friendly. We perhaps have staff that don't know every student's name, don't know every parent's name. So I always want you to start with, let's take a clean legal pad, and what could we be doing better for our students? Every instructor that I talk to on the way in the door, they say, oh no, our students love our instructors. Our students love our school. If we could just get more of them, because we're horrible business people and we don't understand how to market, if we could just get more of them, they love us. Well, the right answer is, what's your monthly dropout rate? Are you dropping out less than 2%? Maybe as low as 1% or even less? Are you renewing essentially everybody who enrolls? Are you at least hitting 80, 85%? Are you having essentially 100% of your students ready for each belt test as they go? Well, if that's true, if you're losing 1.3% a month and everybody's ready for their test each time, and essentially everybody is renewing and committing to black belt, well, then I believe you. You're a great instructor. But if you're losing 7, 8% a month and you're proud of the black belts, but your graduation rate to black belt is 1, 2, or 3, 4, 5%, you're a crappy instructor. The example I used to use was when I was doing these little seminars is I started out by using the example of Harvard, who graduates something like 93% of everybody who starts at Harvard ends up graduating in 4 to 5 years with their bachelor's degree. And I started seeing martial artist eyes glaze over. So I shifted it to asking everybody, who thinks you're better than the worst public school system in the United States, which at the time was the Detroit Public Schools? Who thinks you have a better graduation rate than the Detroit Public Schools? And as arrogant and cocky as most martial artists are, everybody would raise their hand. And I say, well, Detroit Public Schools are graduating 47% to their high school diploma. How many of you over 4 years are graduating 45% to black belt? Okay, well, how many of you are graduating 45% from year 1 to year 2? Right? See, most schools aren't even doing that. So you always want to take that blank legal pad, and every day you're thinking about not what's the new cool curriculum and let's do some XMA or some hyper or that crap. What you're thinking about is how can I really create a higher service to the student? How can I make them feel more comfortable? How can I make sure nobody ever falls through the cracks? How can I make sure that the level of service in the first 90 days is so good, they want to commit to black belt and they're going to be here for life? Then how can I spend the next year making sure that they're happy they made that decision? Then how do I spend the next couple of years making sure that they're thrilled by their progress and they're one of the best black belts that have ever been produced? How do I go through that steps? That's what I want to start with and always focus on directly and first. And again, you got to get out of the idea that technically gifted instructors are necessarily the best ones. I don't want them to be bad. I want them to be a product of the product. But what I want is empathy and sincere concern. And I want the guy or gal who wants their student to be better than they are, not the one who's watching themselves in the mirror all the time, showing off. Anyway, Master, let's go to point number 3.
Okay.
And again, anybody ask any questions, chip in any time. I just don't want us to get us too far off of track as we go. Number 3 is have a strong sales process. Strangely, martial artists a lot of times get repelled by the word sales. Well, really, leadership and selling, closing and facilitating, really it's all the same word and the same skill set. There's no such thing as a great martial arts instructor who's not doing a great job selling all of their students on the idea of truly becoming excellent in martial arts, staying for a long period of time, attaining their black belt, and truly making sure this is a lifestyle. If your staff isn't tuned into, their job isn't to teach this or whatever it might be, their job is to sell the student on the value of training long term and the value of becoming a black belt and the value of essentially being able to give back to martial arts everything they've received. You've got the wrong person or they're poorly trained, right? But the other element is we've got to make sure that that all transmits itself to first contact. No matter whether they came across on Facebook or we were at a live event or they referral, whatever it might be, the process from that first contact to get an appointment, to come in and see us for an introductory lesson, to come back and see us prep to enroll on a trial enrollment with the expectation and excitement about being admitted to and qualified to train to black belt at the beginner stages, to then setting the goal and committing to black belt and beyond. We've got to have that process down so that the ratios are tight, that people are understanding the value, and that the new enrollments, not only we have a high closing rate, but they really are committed and they really are solid. So that's an important step. In the Quick Start member site, we have the entire sales process in there on video and audio and transcripts. If you got the big box with the Fill Your School program, it's all in there. But you got to be really tight on that. Now, you don't know if you're good or bad if you're not keeping really good stats. Peter Drucker, who was a famous management theorist, he said, what gets measured gets done. you'll hear Master Smith, again, like a broken record, talk about stats. Well, stats just means today I write down how many new contacts we had, how many new leads. Then I write down of those new contacts, how many of them make an appointment. And then I write down how many of those appointments showed up. And I write down how many of those appointments that showed up came back again. And then I write down how many of those people who came back again enrolled. And then I write down how many of those did we have a renewal conference with, how many of those did we renew. And I keep track through the process of what our ratios are. And the way you keep good numbers, frankly, is forget software and forget complicated things. At the end of the night, the staff gets together, has a chat, has a review, and you make sure today's numbers are written down before anybody leaves. And then you add today's numbers to the week to date and the month to date numbers. You can do that in an Excel spreadsheet. You can do that with some convoluted martial arts software package, anything in between. Hell, you can do it with one of those big Post-it note paper pads where you just write it down every day, and then you do a week to date total and you do a month to date total. And frankly, writing it down is more effective than anything else. Once you write it down and you discuss it and you review it as a staff, then you can put it into software or you can put it into a spreadsheet or whatever. But we've got to have a strong sales process in place. And the only way to evaluate whether yours is crap or it's great is by keeping track of the numbers and knowing what the benchmarks are. So for instance, you're out at a live event at a movie theater and you're talking to people and you got the prize wheel and all that. We know that 75% or more make an appointment on the spot. So if you're not making 75, 80, even 100% are making appointments on the spot, whoever's talking to them isn't following the script and isn't doing a good job. The other thing that we know is at least 50%, hopefully, and usually 65, 70% are going to show up for an introductory class. We also know of those, at least half are going to enroll, and perhaps even 65, 70% of them. So if we're tracking those numbers and we see, well, we only did 25% that made an appointment. Well, the person handling it was poorly trained and not doing a good job, and we know what to address. Or only 25% showed up. Well, we know that we have two problems. Probably the person interacting and what they gave them and how that went. But we also have a problem of not using something simple like schedule once, getting text and email reminders, not calling to confirm effectively, not mailing them information. Again, we have a lot of things we can go through. But to keep it short and simple, or shorter anyway, is we've got to have a strong sales process in place. Everybody's got to be trained on the script. There can't be individual variation. It's got to be a strong process. And the only way to know whether you're doing a good or bad job is to know your numbers always and to know the benchmark ratios, which, you know, we have ad nauseum and we'll be teaching you. Master, let's go to point 4.
You bet, sir.
And again, I apologize about how much I'm trying to cover and how it's not as interactive as usual today. But I want to start off the new year with everybody really focusing on it. And frankly, I just covered number 4. So we can skip that one. Because and obviously the two are totally interrelated. Point number 5, and by the way, for all the staff who's on there, you might want to look in a mirror, is number 5 is upgrade your staff. Nick Kokinas' old line was cut for the bottom, add to the top. You can add to your staff, and I think about it this way. There's 3 elements that I look at in any staff member. 1, I look at how well trained they are. 2 is I look at how motivated they are. And 3, I look at whether they have the aptitude to do what I'm trying to get them to do. Okay, so aptitude, motivation, training. Now, personally, I think that my role is 100% is to train them. I don't take responsibility for their motivation every day, day in, day out. It's not my job to call them in the morning, give them a wake-up call, do a short Zig Ziglar story, and do the rah win one for the Gipper every day. People mostly bring their own motivation to the job, or they don't. Now, there are things that I can do to ruin their motivation. One way I can ruin the motivation is just by, as a boss, being an asshole. And we could spend a day talking about what that means. But if you're not nurturing and supportive, and if you're doing, I've heard it called seagull management. This was frankly the June Rhee management style. Fly in, squawk, make a lot of loud noise, shit all over everybody, and then fly out. Well, you don't want to manage that way. What you do want to do is you want to make sure everybody really knows their job, and that you don't screw up their motivation, that you support them along, that you keep tight numbers, hold them accountable for their numbers. And again, I don't mean to go back to the stats, but it's just like if I'm taking a bunch of people to a bowling alley, teaching them to bowl. Well, if I blocked off the pins and I blocked off the score and I just had them throw the ball a bunch of times, nobody would be motivated to do that. But a lot of times our staff is like that. They're working and working and efforting, but they don't know what the dropout rate is. They don't know what the retention rate is, which is the converse of that. They don't know what the graduation rate is. They don't know the renewal rate. Maybe they're doing enrollments, but they don't know, perhaps because they haven't been told to keep track, and you're not keeping track of what the intro to enrollment ratio is, what it should be, whether that's good or bad. So again, aptitude, motivation, and training. Training is one of those things that takes 10 times more effort than you think. Martial artists are interesting in that they'll give the receptionist an info call script and say, here's how you handle the phone. And then they'll have a brown belt to get their black belt, do a side kick 10,000 times, do the form 1,500 times, spar for 52 hours, et cetera, knowing that practice doesn't make perfect, perfect practice makes perfect. And also knowing the adage that I don't want you to do it until you know how to do it right. I want you to do it till you can't do it wrong, right? But then on the business stuff, we don't realize it's the same thing. So we've got to train and train and train on each of these steps to the point that you could show up at their house at 3 a.m., shine a flashlight in their face, roust them out of a deep REM sleep, and say, info call, ring, ring, and they would have it perfect. Then you drag them out of bed and say, do an enrollment conference, and they'd have it perfect. See, it's the business scripts are no different than the martial arts side. You wouldn't send somebody in a dark alley to defend themselves after they had heard a lecture on sidekick, right? You would tell them how it works. You'd show them how it works. You'd have them do it by count. You'd have to have it do it one count. You'd have them do it against a bag coming at them. You'd have it do it at a bag moving away. You'd have to do it at a stationary object. You would then teach them, and they're moving their stances and they're building rhythm and timing. And it would take a long time before you'd feel comfortable with just that one technique as a self-defense move. But we pretend, give them the script and walk through it a couple of times, and now they're great at the enrollment process. Well, if that student's worth, $6,000, $7,000, it's worth investing the time to make sure that everybody is perfect. And not only do they know how to do it right, they're so drilled with perfect practice, they can't do it wrong. Master Moody, Master Smith is, again, one of our pet peeves. Any comment on that before I move on?
I would say something on that seagull management thing. I think people get confused about that because the way I look at it is not exactly that you come in and yell at people. That sounds like you're being kind of mean. What I see a lot of is... No,
I'm saying never do that.
Well, right. No, I don't think you should do that. I know that, but I think we do that. I think a lot of people I see do that, not subconsciously, because what happens is you don't manage constantly. And then when you do manage them, it feels like that. So the example I give is I'm always poking at people. I'm always when I go in, I'm always making sure the pads are in the right place. Everything's in the right place. I'm always managing, but subtly and all the time. There's constant management of my staff. There's constant making sure that they're doing stuff. We're constantly training them. We're constantly doing stuff. If you don't do that on a constant basis and then you do it on an irregular basis, that's when people feel that. They feel like they're getting pooped on. So you may not even be mean when you're telling people what to do, but if you don't do it consistently, if you're not consistently enforcing rules, then that's when people feel like you're being a jerk. I've seen a lot of people in that situation where they just inconsistently enforce the rules, and then it feels like that seagull management. So you've got to be very, very consistent. So I guess my message is, you've got to be very disciplined. We teach discipline in martial arts. You've got to follow the same process here. The rules got to be followed 100% of the time, every single time, answer the phone, everything that they do. Same rules as we use for martial arts. Yeah. So that was my thought with that, sir.
And maybe to expand on that briefly, corporate America, you hear about the annual progress review. Well, that's really a really stupid concept. What should happen with every one of your staff is every day, every week, every month, they should have metrics. They should have numbers that they have a benchmark. This is good or bad. And so every day they know they did a great job and can be happy. They did a crappy job and something needs to change. And every day they should know their results. Again, the going bowling example is a perfect one. Well, I know whether I did well or did poorly when I release the ball and it hits the white pins. It either knocked none of them down and I did a gutter ball, or knocked all of them down, or something in between. And I know 3 frames in how I'm doing. I know 5 frames in how I'm doing. See, that's the way that people improve, is they're getting constant and never-ending feedback, and therefore have the ability for constant and never-ending improvement, to steal from Tony Robbins. So you want to have that constant feedback. Again, I don't want to look at, I don't want to look at January stats in middle of February and then go back and yell at people because it did poorly. Well, I should know every day. And, in my staff training regime, I knew on Monday how their month to date was, and I knew on Wednesday how their week to date was shaping up, as well as their month to date. And they were getting feedback from me across multiple schools Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And at individual schools, the branch manager was giving the part-time staff and the full-time staff feedback every day, on retention, on testing progress, on renewals, etc. So it's very important. When you go from a small school to a really big school, you are going to find that you have some staff that, one of my favorite quotes, I think I heard it from Danny Cox, but it probably goes back a ways, is you can't teach a pig to sing. It wastes your time and it irritates the pig. I find a lot of schools that go from small to large find out that they don't have people in place that really can rise to the occasion and are capable of making a solid income that we're capable of. Too many of them are happy with where they're at and what's been doing, and they don't want to rise to excellence. So you've got to go through that process of weeding those people out, adding to the top, cutting from the bottom, never getting in the way of their motivation. And you can certainly carrot and stick it. We want full-time people to be incentive paid. We want them to have goals financially, but most of it comes from within. I can offer somebody a $100,000 bonus, and for most people, it's not going to get them out of bed earlier and get them that excited, because they've got to have their own belief system about whether they can do it, and they've got to have their own drive to do it. So you've got to have somebody who's going to bring their own motivation to the table, and you've got to have somebody who is capable of doing the roles you want them to do, and then you've got to be responsible for training them, not until they know how to do it, but until they can't do it right. Anyway, let's go to number 6. This is my favorite Jun Rhee quote of all time. Martial arts without philosophy is just street fighting. So many schools, and in our industry, more recently, a lot of the MMA guys, they think of this as like a fitness center with choking people, or it's a fitness center with kicking people. They don't truly think of this in the way that this is a solid developmental process. And and this is not a new concept. There's that great book, Karate Do, My Way of Life. There's another book by Peter Urban from the 60s, The Karate Dojo. You can go back in the history and you see the true masters, they were wanting to master themselves, not just teach fighting skill, right? So this is about self-mastery. We want to be teaching character. We want to be teaching emotional stability and development. We want to be teaching goal setting, goal orientation. We want to be developing the entire person. Anytime you take away the moral and the developmental and just make it about the physical, you're now the martial arts without philosophy is just street fighting. The other thing that I'll say about that, by the way, let's look at the kids market. How much is a parent willing to spend for their kid to wear cute pajamas and learn how to do a front kick? I absolutely guarantee you it's a fraction of what they're willing to spend for their kid to develop strong leadership skills, incredible self-discipline, immunity to negative peer pressure, to be the valedictorian or be close to the top of the class, to qualify to go to West Point or go to Harvard or to pursue the whatever objectives they want. If you're not building a path that you're developing the second, you're forever locked into high turnover, low price point stupidity. It's got to be about developing the whole person. By the way, this is more true with 27-year-old males who come in because they like to watch UFC. This is more true with 35-year-old females who come in just to lose the last 10 pounds of baby fat before their sister's funeral. They're not going to articulate it on the way in. That may not be the bait you use to get them into school, but they want those skills and that mindset more so than anybody. So it's essential that you develop a learning environment. And again, in here I talk about really making sure you have the formal aspects of martial arts in place. People are in uniform. They're bowing in and out. There's a student creed. Perhaps there's a creed at the beginning of class. There's a creed at the end of the class. There's a real developmental process that you're teaching them. There's a reverence for the process. There's a reverence for the hierarchy. There's a reverence for the lineage. It's important not to get new students in because they don't care yet, but it's important for your second, third, fourth year black belts and black belts. They've got to revere the lineage. They've got to revere the master teachers. They've got to really revere what it is they're learning at the highest level. And if you don't do that, frankly, you're just in the learning how to do a front kick in cute pajamas. We've got to make sure that we develop that philosophy, we develop that reverence for what they're doing and really anchor that and develop that to the highest level. Let's go to point number 7, Master Moody. And again, any questions at any time, do this. I know that I'm kind of talking fast to stifle it a little bit, but I don't mean to. Ask any questions, post in the Facebook group, ask it live here as we go. Number 7.
Go
ahead.
Quick question. So I've had 6 people want to quit because of the move. Any tip on that about turnover?
I have no idea what you just said, Adam.
He said 6 people want to quit because he moved. He moved like a quarter mile away, I think, and 6 people want to quit.
They feel like the change is the excuse. Orange belts, green belts.
They were getting ready to quit anyway, and that's the excuse du jour.
Okay.
You do all the same things you would have done otherwise. Get them back in, work with them privately, review and renew their goals, get back to why they started, etc. Again, I mean, any change in the school, you're going to have people who come in and say, I want to quit because, and they point at that. But the reality is most of the time, those are people who are already fading out. And now that's just the excuse they use at the time.
Yeah, and that to back what Master Oliver said, and this is relevant to number 7, it's get a really good process when somebody wants to quit, that you follow that process. It's the same no matter what the issue is. You just have to respond to the issue and then follow it. But B, what we're going to talk about here is making sure that you have a good process before they would want to quit. So we have retention prior. The biggest issue with quitting is we don't renew them and all this stuff that we're going to talk about here. So
Exactly.
This is a key point to fix the problem, Adam, before it even starts.
Yeah.
And the point we're going to talk about here is making sure if you don't know what your dropout rate is, you have a bad dropout rate.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's. So when we get to retention, again, this could be a weekend seminar. Let me start with this. Let's look at numbers. In order for me to have 300 active students, if I'm losing 7% a month, that means I need 21 new people every month to stay even. On the other hand, if I'm losing 2% a month, I only need 6 people a month to stay even, right? So if I did 20 enrollments in any given month at 2% retention, I'm adding 18 new students every month that I do that. But at 7% a month, I'm just treading water. I'm like a hamster on a wheel, running, getting nowhere. And by the way, it's much easier to get from 7% dropout a month to 2% than it is to do the enrollments to begin with. It's cheaper, it's easier, requires less labor, it requires less of everything. And frankly, morally and ethically, it's the right thing to do. Getting that dropout rate way down means that you're doing good service. Having the dropout rate means being too high means you're just fooling yourself, and you're teaching kicking and punching and they come and go, but you're not developing human beings at the highest level. Now, one of the things I want you to write down, and this is really important to anchor in, forget about the bozo explosion in our industry, most of whom are busy selling you what you want to hear, meaning they're selling martial artists what they want to hear. So they're selling age-appropriate curriculum, or they're selling hyper and flips and all that stuff, or they're selling 22 new pieces of curriculum or some other curriculum overlay. All of that stuff is not, write it down and anchor it in, that is not, isn't now, never was, never will be the key to retention. People don't drop out because they want some new exciting thing to learn. Not that it's not helpful for your black belts and so forth, but that's not why they drop out. Most of your dropouts are in the first year. Most of those dropouts are in the first 6 months. The number one and number two thing that you can do to fix your dropouts is, number one, focus on rapport. What I mean by focus on rapport is get rid of the technicians and hire nice people. Get them to know every name, to ask questions, to be sincerely interested in every student. Make sure that no student ever gets within 3 foot of the door without being greeted by name. That your staff, and by the way, that's true of everybody on staff. I want my leadership team, assistant instructors, I want my part-time instructors, and I want my full-timers to know that they want to greet every student on the way in the door, that they want to greet them by name, meaning the kids and the parents, meaning the adult and the wife or the girlfriend. Everyone who's in the school, I want them to make eye contact, touch them appropriately, hand on the shoulder, handshake, touch them appropriately, and use their name at least 3 times every time they're in the school. So number one is focus on rapport, or focus on relationships. Ask questions that you are sincere about the person's day, about their life. I always ask questions about the book they're reading. I always ask questions about their career and their job. Ask questions, listen to the answer, take notes, describe that and discuss that with the other staff members so everybody is getting more familiar with your students. One of the examples I've used a lot, if you're new, you probably haven't heard it, my friend Keith Hafner, who at one time was probably running the single most profitable school in the country. Right now, we probably have the top 5. But Keith, one of the times I was visiting, he had this like conference room that he used as his office for staff meetings. And he had one of those things that you see in hotel meeting rooms a lot, where they fold out and there's a bulletin board, and there's like a whiteboard, and then you can close it so nobody sees what's in there on the wall. And so I walk over and I open that, and there's like 10 Polaroid pictures. I love Polaroids. There's like 10, and by the way, that's back. You can do the one-off pictures, which I would have 5 of them. And there's like 10 pictures up on the bulletin board in there. I say, Keith, what is this? He goes, that's everybody who dropped out last month or within the last 90 days that I'm pissed off about. I said, well, let's start with the pissed off about. Are there others that dropped out? He goes, yeah, there's a couple of them that we shouldn't have enrolled to begin with. But these are the people who dropped out that I'm pissed off about. Now, just in the language of him as a close friend of mine, one of my best friends, describing this to me, picture how his staff meeting goes 3 times a week when he walks over and he opens that board. Can you picture it? The other thing that was on the desk is there was a little, card box, and I went in there and there were a bunch of Polaroids there. The Polaroids, if it was a kid, it was with mom and dad. And if it was an adult, sometimes it was with the wife or the husband. Sometimes it was just an individual. And I said, what is this? He goes, every time we have a little staff gathering, which we do every day, we use those as what do you call it? Master Media, what do you use like math? You use it as cards where you hold it up.
What are you talking about?
Flashcards?
Flashcards, that's the word I'm looking for. Thank you, Master Smith. So we use this flashcard. So what they do is they pull up the picture, and everybody's got to know the name. Everybody's got to know the parent's name. And they go through to make sure that every full-time, part-time, and leadership team member knows every name of every new student, and then anchors it in so that they use those names, greet the parents by name and greet the kids by name, greet the fiance by name, greet the student by name, 3 times every class, every day, within 3 foot of the door initially as well. Does that make sense? So number 1, to fix your dropout rate is to get them comfortable and get them well received in the school early on, and then keep it that way. So all of your thoughts about, oh, I've got to have more exciting music in class, and we've got to rev it up. We got to have a better class plan. We've got to keep things moving. We got to have high energy. Well, yeah, okay, that's all fine, but it doesn't fix rapport. The single most exciting schools that I have seen from my friends, people that we used to take them and have them watch them for staff training, Ernie Reyes Sr., Dave Kovar, Steve LaValle, they all had high dropout rates. The schools that I've seen with the lowest dropout rate was they were friendly. They immediately made somebody feel like they were part of the family. Nobody fell through the cracks. Everybody was wrapped in a wool blanket, metaphorically, as soon as they came in, and never allowed to slip through the cracks, and always attuned to their needs. The key is not high energy. The key is rapport. The second key is goals. So if you don't take a white belt, and in those first 2 months, get them where they're committed to and dedicated to and put in writing, they're going to be a black belt. You have somebody who's just training next month because they trained last month and are kind of going through it until they get bored or until something new catches their fancy. So number 1 is rapport. Number 2 is goals. You've got to get them where they set their goals to train to black belt and beyond. And if you're doing a good job getting white belts to set their goal to be a black belt, you'll have great retention. And if you're doing a bad job getting white belts to set their goal to black belt, you'll have bad retention. Doesn't matter how charismatic the instructor is. Doesn't matter if he's a world champion fighter. Doesn't matter if they can kick vertically. Doesn't matter if the class is so exciting that people's endorphins are shooting off and they're, just so almost exhausted at the end of the class from the excitement level. None of that matters if it doesn't have rapport and goals. Does that make sense? So again, this is one of those areas of it doesn't get measured, it doesn't get done. Every instructor I talk to thinks they're great. All of my staff thought they were great. You know why? If If you have 200 students, you have 60 of them who are in your face all the time telling about how you walk on water. If you want to get a better perspective, make sure the instructor talks to everybody who dropped out in the last year. That's a better perspective. One of my favorite movies, by the way, is the Days of Thunder with Tom Cruise. There's a great line in there. I forget which character it was. Maybe it's Robert Duvall, who says, "Oh no, drivers won't go to hospitals. They don't want to face the risk of their injury or death. They don't want to face their mortality." Well, instructors don't want to talk to people who don't revere them. Instructors don't want to talk to people who felt left out. Instructors don't want to talk to people who got bored and faded away for the same reason. It's an ego trip to be talking to people who tell you how great you are. It's reality to be talking to the others at least as well. Questions or thoughts on that? No?
Yeah, I think the key point you said is if you're not paying attention to this, it definitely is going to be bad.
Yeah.
You know, if this is, and by the way, all the stuff we've said so far, 1 through 7, won't take a lot of time.
No.
There are things, and that's why we're trying to hit you with these early in the year. And for some of you guys, you're new with us or pretty new with us. And some of you guys are old with us and you haven't fixed these 7 things yet.
Exactly.
You just need to fix them. So that's why it's a little different in this meeting, to not be as interactive and not be kind of answering questions as you go through. This is a checklist of things that you need to get to. So you want to go to the next one then?
No,
Yeah.
let's stay there for just 1 second.
Go
I think the biggest thing on retention is most instructors, I've never met an instructor when I asked him how good of an instructor he was that they didn't say they were a great instructor, that they really care about the students or they have good quality students. What I always measured how good an instructor was what was his retention and what was his dropout rate. Because if you don't have an ID card system, some people do the scan, but I'm talking about the physical card that they're actually bringing to class. There's really no way to track an accurate day-to-day system. So if you don't have a system of tracking your retention, you are going to have terrible retention. Even when people start tracking it, they find out they have terrible retention. Now, at least I know how to fix it. But most of them will say, oh, well, my classes are full. I'm not losing anybody. But then when we actually go through their numbers of how many you started with at the beginning of the year and how many you ended up with at the end of the year, minus the enrollments, then all of a sudden, you know, they have about a 50 to 100% dropout. So it's very critical that they do have the ID card system and a system in place to help them with their retention.
Exactly. And again, you talk about the ID card system. Again, without going too far down that, one of the best schools I ever saw on retention, good friend of mine had the craziest, silliest curriculum I've ever seen. The classes weren't dynamic, excited. They, you know, all of that stuff wasn't in place. However, they had great retention. And one of the things the instructors were trained to do, and this was, by the way, 800 active students in one location, is every class they went through the ID card. They had a whiteboard up that covered an entire wall. And every day, every student's current classes, number of classes needed for the next belt, and deficit, if there was any, were put on the board. And every day, the instructor would reference that, reference the ID card, and walk every student through, well, Billy, you have 12 classes. You should be at 14 right now. You need 24 for the next belt test. We need to work on getting a makeup of those 2 classes. They were doing that every day. And then when somebody missed the Tuesday at 6:15 class, somebody was on the phone with them at 6:30. Oh, Mrs. Jones, I noticed that Billy's not here. I was hoping that he wasn't sick or anything. Oh, okay, that's, you know, I know how that stuff, something came up. I want to make sure we still get our 2 classes a week and this week. And keep in mind, we're looking to do a couple makeups in the next 4 weeks. When can we schedule him for that extra class to make up for today? Do you think tomorrow night will work, or will Thursday work? So they were going through that every time with every student, never letting anybody fall through the cracks. again, we could go on this, but let's keep going because we have 3 more points. This is the next one where we sound like a broken record. Every school that we work with who is failing to have enough new enrollments, they're just, and this is is not very technical and it's not very sophisticated, but they're just not doing enough stuff. Is if I want to have 20 new students every month, I should just have 20 things that are likely to generate 1 or more students every month happening so that I have a guarantee of at least 20 new people. Now, what happens with marketing is, one is Murphy's Law is real. So as soon as I have the one big event that's going to give me 70 enrollments this month, because you guys told me these things work, it's the same time that in Colorado you're going to have a blizzard or you're going to have hail or you're going to have a tornado warning. In Texas, you're going to have tornadoes or floods. And in, God knows we go through the country. Something is going to happen that's going to screw with that more times than not, right? You want to have 20 things going on every month. You want to have external live events. You also want to have, for the kids market, community outreach directly with public and private elementary schools. You also want to have internal family add-on and referral events and activities and birthday parties and buddy days and movie nights and women's self-defense things, a ton of that stuff going on. You also want to really master Facebook advertising. Usually we, once somebody's at that stage, we tie them up with our recommended ad agency, which is Elite Digital, to do that. You want to make sure you have Google AdWords and SEO done. Usually when somebody's at that stage, we recommend company Master Moody also works with, Go to Karate. 97 Display is pretty good as well, but Go to Karate is usually our recommendation. You want to make sure you have PR going on constantly so that you're getting press in the local newspapers and on live radio and TV, etc. But you want to have all of the grassroots marketing stuff going on. Banners on the school, signs rotating the windows, bandit signs out. You want to have rack cards, 200 or 300 placements of rack cards everywhere. You want to have flyers on the Domino's, Pizza Hut, Papa John's delivery boxes. You want to have charitable fundraisers going on with the Ronald McDonald House. So you have flyers going on in the bags at the drive-thru and tray liners. You want to have a long list of stuff going on. And yes, we have.
Post this. This is on the Facebook group, and you can grab it. We've got a really great marketing checklist you did, Master Oliver. So I hope you guys are taking notes really fast as he's talking. But all this stuff is on. We've got a really great marketing checklist you should be using. And the Mile High Karate marketing plan's another one that you can use as a sample of all the stuff that he's talking about. Sorry to interrupt your
no.
But these are all things you can download right now and to get all these things done. And this is not rocket science. This is pretty straightforward for you to do. Is it easy? You got to do some work, but you can do this within the budget that you have.
Yeah. And this is, of all of this stuff, this is the most labor intensive and the most expensive thing that you're going to do. All of the other internal things and all of the other stuff really is not very labor intensive and truthfully doesn't cost much, if any, money. The marketing side is the one place that is either going to have labor, money, or a combination of the two that's tied to it. But again, write down, always get more things added to your plan. We were having a conversation earlier in the week, and one of our members said, well, yeah, I was having really good results with Facebook advertising, but I ended up with 2 or 3 big events going on, so I cut off Facebook. That's just the dumbest thing ever, right? Is what you want to do is layer on and then layer on and then layer on. Other people tell me, well, we have plenty of new enrollments coming in. I don't need to worry about that. No, you don't do that because, one, I mean, over the years, my primary source for many years was Third Page, TV Guide, Denver Post, Rocky Mountain News. It was pulling great. I was spending over $100,000 a year with them. Of Great. Well, one, TV Guide doesn't exist anymore. Two, Rocky Mountain News doesn't exist anymore. Three, Denver Post is a shadow of its former self, right? The other thing that we did for years that was pulling great, big budget, was long form infomercial, 27.5 minutes. Well, that has changed as well. One thing that I've done great, was worked really well, does work really well, continues to work really well, is direct community outreach, PE teacher for the day, after school enrichment programs, both directly to elementary schools. Well, Littleton, Colorado is the home of Columbine. When Columbine hit, I had 3 schools within a 2 to 3 mile range from Columbine. I had one in Inglewood, I had one in Littleton, I had one in Lakewood. Each of them had students from Columbine. What happened is for 18 months, we couldn't do anything with any of the schools because they all freaked out, understandably, and they locked down everything. Well, if that was like the primary driver, then we would have been in bad shape, right? You got to have a bunch of different things going on, knowing that in any given month, some are going to work well, some are going to flounder, knowing that in any given year, some things are going to rise and some things are going to fall. 2 years ago, I hated Facebook. Right now, I love Facebook. I also see the politicians every day trying to kill Facebook. The politicians in the last year have taken a bunch of stuff away that was really helpful with Facebook. So maybe it's a great source in 3 years. Maybe our politicians in their infinite insanity and stupidity are going to kill it. I don't know. But what they're upset about is all the tools that make it work really well for us. But that's just one example of, you've got to have a broad base. You want it to be like the Greek Parthenon, where you have 20 or more things going on every month. Some of them are going to be base hits. Some of them are going to be home runs. Some of them are going to be grand slams, and some of them are going to be strikeouts. That's okay. Have a bunch of stuff going on and keep layering and layering and layering. And even if you have enough students coming in, you want to be getting more well-known in the community. You want to be the go-to guy in all the local elementary schools. You want to be the go-to guy with all the local charities. You want to be the only name that anybody in a 5 or 10 or 15 mile radius knows. Mile High Karate in Denver, Colorado, it doesn't matter if it was 1983 or it was 1980, 89, 95, 2005, 2015. We are the only one that they knew. Junery Institute, 80s, 90s, the only one that they knew. You want to have that kind of impact and create that kind of stability for you. Anyway, move on. Number 9. This is a really difficult one for martial artists. Some of my good friends who are also, in the consultant mode, I won't put them in the bozo mode, but I will chastise a little bit. You got to separate what you like about what you're doing with what your students need, want, and like about what they're doing. So you've got to separate what your hobby is from what your business is. In my case, when I moved to Denver, the thing that I liked most about physically training, which I was infected by Jeff Smith here, the thing I liked most about physical training was kickboxing. I liked working out in the boxing gym with Jimmy Jones. I liked working out in the kickboxing gym with Jeff and Rodney and all those guys. I liked the physical training, the bag work, the speed bag, all the stuff. I liked the actual sparring. And short of, letting him hit me, I liked everything about it. I didn't like Rodney or Jeff Smith hitting me. Anybody else was fine. But that was not the thing that was going to grow 5 schools in 18 months to 1,500 students, 6 schools in 30 months to 2,500 students. That was not the thing that was going to keep us viable, alive, and successful for 35 years and counting, right? So you've got to figure out what it is you love, how that applies to what your role is as an educator. Keep them separate when necessary. Don't lose what you love about martial arts training and so forth. But when you put your educator hat on, what does your target audience want to learn? What is it you need to teach them in order for them to develop as a full human being? What's the process to go through? The other thing, and I'll touch on this lightly because it applies to retention as well, is we as martial artists tend to try to teach people way too much stuff in the first year and have too low of expectations of what they can accomplish in 4, 6, and 8 years, but too high of expectations of what we're going to try to get them to learn in the first year. The first year is about making the decision, commitment, and enthusiastic goal to black belt. The second year is about making sure they're excited about that goal. The third year is about really developing them at a high level. And the fourth year is about making sure they turn in to a black belt that you're proud of and that you welcome in your home and that you want to be an example to the world. You don't do all that in the first year.
Yeah, and the thing that you said, Master Oliver, that I think is so important for all of our school owners is that you motivate your instructors by giving them that physical training. You know, we had, when I was world champion and training all of them, we had either the world champion or the #1 contender in every weight class. And we trained physically very hard each week, but I made every one of them also just equally what we were training physically, we were training in business. And because I did that and I opened that vision to everybody that the fighting and all you're doing now is a short road, that, you know, your career, your competition career will end, you know, a lot sooner. But if you want to have a business, if you want to have a livelihood, competing is not a livelihood. That's an entertainment. That's a sport. That's something that you have fun with. Even though nowadays with UFC, a lot of them are becoming millionaires. But back then we didn't. We had to have the business knowledge. And so by training them, I got their respect from doing the physical training, but then taught them the real lifetime skills that taught them how to run schools and do all of these business systems that you have been able to upgrade. And see, the problem with a lot of people is they learn something and they think whatever they learned this year is going to carry them the rest of their life. It doesn't. Things change every year. So if you're not changing it with it, and that's why Master Oliver's on the cutting edge of what is the latest and the greatest thing. We don't necessarily do exactly what we did last year. We do what we do last year plus whatever we had to change and revise to keep our schools growing, because the bottom line is you're either green and growing or you're ripe and rotting. And if your growth is going down or flatlined, then you're not doing the same thing that you're not doing the right thing, even if it was the same thing you did last year that was successful. And that's why I hear school owners tell me, well, you know, we're doing pretty good, but I said, what's your gross? And they'll give me a number. And then I'll say, well, what was your gross the year before that about this? And then I find out for the last 5 years, they've been doing that, or it's been slowly going down. So if you're not going up, that means you're not making the changes. You're not keeping track of your stats. You're not setting your goal. You're treating it more like a hobby, not a business.
Well, back to this point here on the hobby as well. The one thing I think, Master Oliver, there's a corollary to that is if you've come in with a system that your instructor taught you or your organization taught you and you've got a curriculum, but it's top heavy or bottom heavy, like you've got to teach a lot of curriculum in your first year that seems to conflict with what you're saying, you can still be honoring that program. Or a lot of times we have people in the jiu-jitsu world that they've got, you know, it's 20 years to black belt, and that's fine. We can still make it all fit. So you've got to make the structure, you can still honor where you came from, but still make the structure fit something that's going to work for your students.
Exactly.
So don't work. We want to work on making it fit the right way. And a lot of times these structures that we've been handed or the way you've been taught wasn't really set up the right way for student retention. It wasn't set up the right way for your business. That doesn't mean you can't still honor what you've learned in the past. But you've got to be open to changing things around and just restructuring things. And we're really good at helping you with that.
Absolutely. And my last point here in number 10 is eliminate self-defeating thinking and elevate your expectations. Now, not so much today, but the number one thing that we did a few years ago is we went from almost all of our interaction one-on-one to essentially all of our interaction being in small group. The improvement was massive. The main place where improvement was massive is I concluded that I can be, no matter how much somebody thinks of me as the expert, or Master Smith, Master Moody, Mr. Dunn, I can say to you, doesn't matter that everybody else in your area is charging $80 a month and you're already at the top end of what everybody's charging in your area. You can charge $247 a month. You can charge $297 a month. Just doesn't matter. Stop worrying about it. Well, I can say that, but what happens subconsciously or consciously is a lot of times they say, well, yeah, maybe you can, but I can't here. Denver isn't the same as, wherever. Or maybe you're such a good salesman, you can do that, but I can't do that. My staff couldn't do that. But when you're on a video meeting like this, and you hear, like we did on an earlier meeting, you hear Amanda Olson, who used to be at $85 a month, is now at $247 for a new enrollment. You hear Paul Pendergast, who used to be at $149, who's at $247 for a new enrollment. You hear Greg Macy, who's relatively new now to running his own schools. I mean, he was a staff member of mine for many years, but he's charging $327 for a new enrollment. You hear over and over and over again, you hear Colby Winkler say, yeah, I was in a meeting and he said, who's charging less than $120 a month? And I raised my hand. He said, when are you going to grow a pair of balls? And I realized I was the only one. And he's in Mankato, Minnesota, with a $38,000 a year median income, with 35,000 population, charging $247 a month for new enrollments. You hear that over and over and over again, and all of a sudden you say, well, it must be just what I'm thinking. It's not reality out there. I can do that. The other thing that happens is, you go out and you do a movie theater event or you do some other live event and you crap out on it. Well, it's easy to think, well, he's telling me that, but that doesn't really work. He's just trying to make that sound good. But then you hear Ken Gibson, who went to the movie theater and got 300 appointments. Then he went out and got 150 appointments. And then their only problem was they had too much intro traffic they couldn't handle, and their ratios declined. And then you hear over and over and over stories like that. You come out to one of our meetings, you see Alan Ogle make 160 appointments in 5 hours. Well, seeing other people and hearing their stories is powerful. When you post on the Facebook group, which again is something that we've just gotten to be really active in the last couple of years, you post in there and you hear other people essentially using the same format over and over and over again. I understand how you feel. I felt the same way, but what I found was you hear that over and over and over again. Well, it helps eliminate that crap that's going on between your ears. Because all of us have great excuses on why we can't do that or why we can't do any piece of it. But the reality is there's massive opportunity, but you've got to get rid of the self-defeating thinking and elevate your expectations.
And let me give you another example there, Master Oliver, because in the early 70s to the late 70s, we were charging at the June reorganization back then $149 a month. Well, that was back when you could buy a Corvette for $3,000 or $4,000, a brand new Corvette. Now a brand new Corvette's $80,000 to $100,000. I mean, everybody else has raised their prices over the years on every commodity there is out there, and all cars and all, I mean, everything, except I still see martial artists that are charging what they were charging 40 years ago. Well, so, you got to realize rents are higher, everything else is higher, and you cannot run a business successfully on 1970 prices.
Well, but moving away from pricing for a second.
Exactly. Yeah, Master Oliver, I was going to say the other thing about price is sometimes we're talking to people about their schedule. And the self-defeating thing is, I can't do this because I have to stay home with my kids and I can't do it, like I have to pay, I'd have to pay $15 an hour for daycare, or I have to pay $20 an hour for daycare. I can't afford doing that because I can't. That might be something to speak about too.
Yeah, or I can't do the marketing because I show up at my school at 9 o'clock and I'm busy with busy work all day and I don't have time to do that, right? I mean, there's all kinds of things. The last thing I want to hit on this is almost everybody that you talk to is not the success that you want to be. The Tom Hopkins quote that I've used forever is never take advice from somebody more screwed up than you are. If your parents were top 1% of the income ladder and retired as millionaires, great. They have some valuable insights onto how to grow an income and grow wealth. If they weren't, then hearing advice from parents and immediate family about what you should do with your business, especially if they punch the clock 9 to 5 and you're now an entrepreneurial business owner, is not very useful. The other thing that happens is most of us go to association events, tournaments, and we interact with other martial artists. Most of them are failures. No matter how skilled they are, most of them are part-timers if they run a school. Most of the ones that run a school full-time aren't making a top 1% income. Even the ones that are making a good income, oftentimes it's because their personality, and it's personality driven, is not duplicatable. So you've got to be really careful where you get advice, what you listen to, how you interpret things. What you want to do is, we give you examples of 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 success stories. If Amanda can do it in small town Tennessee, and Colby can do it in small town Minnesota, and I can go through the list, and if Paul can do it in Brick, New Jersey, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you can do it where you're at. But what happens when you get off one of our meetings and you go interact with your martial arts peers, you have to metaphorically at least do this and not let them seep defeatist thinking into your mind. You've got to not look at the other guys in your area, most of whom aren't very successful, and say, well, I can't charge more, I can't do more, I can't do more than they are, because that's just what happens in our city. You've got to eliminate all that stuff. The only one to pay attention to are top 1%ers who are using duplicatable systems that are replicatable in your environment. That's what we're doing all the time. Master Smith, Master Moody, on that note, I have to be out of here for an appointment. We're a little over our time, but I would like to open it up for questions if you guys have a couple of minutes to do that.
Yeah.
So let's open it up for questions. There's more on this handout that I'm not going to cover today, and some of it is repetitious. So, Master Moody, you could stop the screen share and let's do questions as long as either one of you gentlemen have some time here, and then I've got to leave to be at an appointment across town.
Well, let's take a couple minutes. Let's take, I can stay for another 10 minutes for questions for everybody, but I just wanted to add on to what you said, Master Oliver. I think this was really valuable. I don't know if everybody, this is not our normal format for the meeting. And a lot of it was us talking, Master Oliver talking a lot about, which was, I think, super valuable for everybody. Those 10 things are what, you're maybe a couple of you are doing a few of them pretty well, but even if you are doing them pretty well, there are things that you can up. And
Master, remind everybody of the Quick Start meeting before you go.
Bob, when's the Quick Start meeting? What's the dates? I think you said July when we first said it at the beginning. January. What's the dates there, Bob?
Yeah, January 23rd to the 25th. Come in on Thursday. The 23rd will be at, we'll have the school in Thornton will be open, so come in there that evening.
And Bob, are you the moderator?
I am. I got it.
Okay.
That was really good, sir. Thank you. Really good.
I'd like to remind everybody to make sure that you come in on Thursday, because on Thursday at 5 o'clock till about 8 o'clock, we do a little behind the scenes at the Thornton Mile High Karate. Even though there's other schools you could visit, myself or Master Oliver will be at the Thornton School with Amanda and Steve Christensen and their staff, and you'll actually get to see them going through intros, doing the interaction with the character stripes, and all of these systems that we're talking about. You'll be able to see them in action at an actual school. And for a lot of our members, they tell me that until they actually saw it, they really didn't quite understand how everything fit together. And it's just like everything was a cloud. And when they saw that, then everything kind of cleared up and it gave them a much better sense of direction. So we used that Thursday evening just to kind of kick things off for everybody. So, you know, we tell everybody video that whole thing while you're there so you can go back and show it to your staff that didn't make the training. So they can see how some of these things that we're talking about work and operate. You'll have an opportunity to talk to me and Master Oliver there the whole weekend, of course, but Thursday night at the school, you'll be able to ask questions as they're happening. And I'll even try to break it down for everybody and explain steps and procedures, and then things will start making better sense.
Right. Yeah. So guys, just don't try to overthink a lot of these things. The 10 things on the list, just do them. Don't try to like figure out reasons why you can't raise your price, reasons why you can't fix your retention. Just make that your checklist, do them. And by next week when we meet, if you've done a bunch of stuff and made progress, that's step number one. The other is just schedule time to go there. I know you've got some reason why you've got to be in town that weekend. Unless it's your own wedding or your own funeral, just go there. Okay, so don't try to overthink it. Any questions we got, because we got about 10 minutes, we can stay later. What other questions you guys have? I mean, we covered so much stuff. We want to let you guys talk. What do we got here?
Just unmute yourself.
Yeah, we muted everybody for background information or background noise.
I say get four-wheel drive too.
Yeah, you don't have to get four-wheel drive. Like it depends on the weather.
Okay, guys, raise your hand or something.
Yeah, just
Or
unmute.
if we covered everything, we're good. Kevin, did you have a question?
Yes, gentlemen, regarding staff pay, do you guys have suggestions on like the, chief instructor, program managers, like salary and then commission structures, or is that somewhere I can find in the Quick Start Facebook page?
We made a lot of comments on the Facebook page about that. It depends a lot on what they're specifically going to do. I mean, are they really truly going to be full-time? Are they going to be, full-time, meaning they don't have another job and they're not just showing up, they're a chief instructor, but they're showing up at 5 o'clock, teaching some classes and going home? Because remember what we said on one of those checklists that, you want to have the right kind of staff for one of those items that we talked about, and have the right kind of people in your school. So is it—
A lot of that is depending on what your school is grossing, what you can actually afford to pay them. What we usually like to recommend for full-time staff is that they have a minimum guarantee with a commission, and you kind of base that minimum guarantee and where the commission starts. I usually say, well, if we grossed X amount last year, then that's what they're going to need to make as a base salary. We'll get a base salary based on that. And then as the school grows, anything that goes above that minimum part, then we can give them a percentage of. And a typical percentage for an instructor or program director is usually 5 to 10%, depending on how long they've been with you and their seniority.
Yeah, 5 to 10% over that minimum gross. So if you were
Exactly
25,000 last year, 20,000 last year, and you're with us now, so you plan on doing 30,000, then they could make 5 or 10% of that if they're a full-time employee. Part-time employees would make less. They make a percentage. You want to keep your overall payroll percentage, as Grandmaster Smith is talking about, your overall payroll percentage about 25%. So think about that. So if you're grossing 20,000, then you have 5,000 to work on payroll.
And I'll tell you, a typical $20,000 school, typical annual, depending on your demographic where you are, because some of you have a higher cost of living, is like Master Oliver was talking about, like a $25,000 a year job plus commission. So if your school was doing 25 and then that month it did 30, they would have maybe a 250 to 500 bonus on top of their normal 2,000 or 2,500 a month salary, whatever you're paying them.
Yeah, we don't want to take, we want to have some time for other questions, but the other thing is, and you can read some things on the Facebook group, you want to be really careful when you're doing commissions of not getting too complicated. If you end up giving them a bonus for testing and a bonus for some enrollments and a bonus for this and a bonus for that and a bonus for this, it starts getting so complicated that they don't really know when they're in the moment what they're doing. The nice thing about giving them a bonus on the gross of the school is then you're every day, as we just talked about in the prior conversations, you heard us talk a lot about stats. Every day, my guys know how much they made. They have to count that at the end of the day, and they write it on a sheet of paper and they project what that means for the end of the month. So they know exactly how much money, based on what they made today, that's going to mean at the end of the month. So they know, like we're the 9th of the month now, at the end of today, they're going to know what that's going to equal at the end of the month, and that they could calculate what they're going to make. And it's very simple.
And we make sure they know how to do that, and that way they start becoming more, less resistant to change, because they know you're changing these things to increase the gross of the school, which is going to increase their salary. So
Yeah.
I find that the staff don't reject new things when it could mean that they could make more money.
Yeah, and so your measuring stick becomes the gross. And when the measuring stick is the gross, then it changes how they look at it. Now, you got to be a little careful. I have had some employees that went a little too far, and now they're trying to, I had one guy that I hired. He wasn't one of my people from White Belt. I remember one guy that tried to cash everybody out, and, he came from outside, and that wasn't my strategy. And so he thought that was the overall goal, because cash was the most important thing to him. Well, it is to us too, but we want to do it the right way. So does that help you, Kevin?
Okay, got it.
What other questions do we have, guys? We got a couple minutes. Got time for one more.
Go ahead, Tony. Unmute yourself there, Tony.
Tony, you're talking, but we can't hear you, bud.
You know how? There you go.
That 25% over gross for payroll, that's to spread out among all your employees, not 25% for each.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you, I have had scenarios like I had a partner in one of my schools. He owned 49%, I own 51%. That's all I've ever done because I have control. And so my strategy with him was, you have 25%, do whatever you want with it. If you want to be the employee, you can. And of course, he wanted other help. So he got to divvy that up. But that was an unusual case, probably not worth talking about. But yes, that's 25%.
The only thing that I would be careful with that is I've had it where I knew that an instructor was over, because he was getting a bigger percentage if he didn't hire somebody else, but the gross wasn't going up the way it should be if he had somebody extra in there. So I do try to control that, so the gross is going up.
Yeah, again,
So, program director, chief instructor, basically, what kind of should they get each? If I have full-time.
Yeah, it depends on what they're doing. So you guys, I know you guys want really specific examples, but when you're hiring anybody in our kind of business, it's not like there's a job description that we give you and then you end up getting this perfect thing that ends up getting slotted most of the time. If you get somebody that's working, 40, 50 hours a week, they're a regular full-time employee, and they've been with you a while, and they're going to be a full-time manager, they're fully responsible for the school, they might be getting 10, 11% of the gross. They might, but I'm not even working at that school. So remember, I'm not teaching at my school. I'm not going there. This isn't a situation in that case where I'm getting, I'm paying myself a salary and then they get 12% of the gross. In that case,
and you guys that are going to be in Colorado, we'll talk specifically to your situation, because when we kind of know what your gross is and how many staff you have, and then we can give you more accurate demographic, exactly what you should be paying them or what you could be paying them if you like. But when you do the general, sometimes it doesn't fit every school. We need to know what your gross is, their experience. Sometimes you have a senior instructor and the other guy's just a new program director. Well, he shouldn't be getting the same. And so there's all those kind of variables that we'll talk to you directly if you need some help with that.
Yeah. So
yes. I got young part-time staff I got to develop or hire.
Yeah, we'll show you how to do that. That's an easy fix.
Okay.
Yeah, and the general guideline is 25% of your gross to payroll. That's the general guideline. So you've got to try to fit it into that.
Yeah. We can calculate it exactly when you come out. Just bring your stats when you come out so we know, what your school averaged last month or what's an average monthly gross. So that gives us a little more accuracy.
Okay. So Delfino, you had a question?
Yes, I'm getting ready to implement the books. How do you implement that with your current students without so much resistance from the parents?
Well, there's no resistance. You just see a lot of things that we want to implement. If you make a big deal out of something, it's a big deal. If I come in today and say, here's a book, do this, they'll just do it. If you go, we're going to do this new thing and it's going to be this, and I know you might be thinking that it takes a lot of work, and then it's going to be a big damn deal.
Okay.
So
you tell them that it's part of the curriculum, because when you start forcing them to do stuff, you get some pushback. But if you give them the book and say, we're going to be covering this in class in our mat chats, because our purpose for training in here is not just the physical, but we also want to affect the mental side, the other aspects of the martial arts. So then in my mat chats, I'm talking about in chapter 1, and then the next week I go to chapter 2, and then just take a chapter each week, or sometimes the books are longer or shorter, so you might do 2 chapters in 1 week. And then they'll start looking at those things after you set them even.
Okay.
Yeah, but anything you implement, so the more general rule for all you guys, when you're implementing stuff, we got that checklist of 10 things, just do it. And what ends up happening is we worry about people complaining, right? That's the worry. Somebody's going to push back. Well, the reality of it is it's usually 1 or 2% of people push back. So what's going to happen if you make a big deal out of it, it's 10% or 20% of people push back. And then you're all stressed out from the beginning. So just do it. And when 1 or 2% of people push back, you just explain it to them and say, yeah, that's the rule. And when you say it's the rule and that's what we're going to do, it's not a big deal. And then you're all excited and happy about it. So change your attitude. It's that number 10. Number 10 is the most important one, guys. It's your mindset about it. It really is. It'll change your life if you just decide, look, you're a professional martial arts instructor. You know what you're doing, whether you really do or not.
And utilize that Facebook page by posting. If you have a question on implementation of something like that, there's going to be at least 10 other posts that people had in there that told you what they did, and maybe some videos or printed material about it, or some question and answer and response. So it gives you a lot of feedback when you learn how to use that Facebook page and our member Quick Start program with all that information in there too. But that's why we like the live meetings, is we can talk directly with everybody. So bring all your questions and any of that kind of stuff when you come out to Colorado, so we can make sure that we empower you enough when you're out there that you'll be able to go back and get anything going.
Okay. So probably time for one more question. Anybody else got any other things that are burning? Because we're quite a bit over today. Okay. Well,
okay, did a good job.
Wait. Jacob had a question. Jacob, instead of just raise your hand, because we can't always see it in the group, just unmute and start talking. Okay. Yeah, don't raise. It's not a raise hand thing because we can't always see everybody.
Okay, so my question was just about live events. Excuse me. I've heard people mention that there's a script that we can get trained on for those live events, and I haven't been able to find that.
Bob, can you show? Maybe Bob's busy there. It's on the member site, and if you go to the Quick Start part of the member site, Bob, I don't know if Bob's. I know you were busy doing something there, but it's on the Quick Start part of the member site. It's also in the Facebook group. If you look at movie promotion or movie procedures, event and movie procedures, you can find it in the Facebook group.
Yeah, there's a whole script. And remember, Jacob, we like you to try to search for it, but don't kill yourself searching it. If it's taking you longer, too long and you still can't find it, then just repost the question, and then we'll attach another post to that, or we'll reprint something there, or give you an attachment that you can find something. But we do like you to try to look for it first, just because you're able to get immediate results when you can do that. Whereas when you post it, it'll sometimes take a day or two to get all the answers you want. But feel free to do that if you don't get your answer. Bob, can you pull that up real quick on the movie script on the Quick Start?
It's in the member site, Jacob. And if we can't find that pretty quick, we'll, oh, there we go.
There it is.
Live event promotions, Jacob?
Oh, I see it. Okay.
Yeah, remember we hit that. I know we cover so much when we go over these things, but absolutely, it's right here. And
Okay.
also, for example, today's meeting was a really powerful meeting. I mean, the mindset is the number one thing that typically is the barriers with our new members. I've been doing this for a long time now, and it's once they get past that, that they start making these big leaps and bounds. But the reason I bring up this meeting being a very powerful meeting, any of the meetings that we have, if you go back to the homepage, I don't know if you recall, but we do have them all recorded. So you can go back and you can watch the replay on that meeting if you didn't miss something, meant to take notes down on something as well.
See where the arrow is?
Where my mouse is, Zoom meeting replays. Master Moody had also screen shared in the middle of the annual marketing plan. That's right here. He had referenced the Facebook. I'd like you guys to utilize the member site more so just to get familiar with it. And if there's something on there that we don't have that you're looking for, please let me know. I can always ask our webmaster to kind of update and help you guys. The annual marketing plan is right there.
Just go through and click on all those things yourself to find out where they are, because sometimes the name isn't what you actually thought it was, and sometimes you're looking for something and you're looking under the wrong name. So just kind of familiarize yourself with that whole quick start procedure, and it'll help you a lot.
The marketing checklist was another thing that he had brought up. That is also right there. Master Smith was talking about the hard copy attendance cards in this meeting today. Those are right there as well. They are editable, so you can print those off and put those on stock card or whatever you wish to do as well. Again, I need you guys, I need you guys to RSVP me, text me who's going to the live event at the end of this month. So that's going to be the 23rd through the 25th. And if you could text me directly that you're going, or you know how many people you're bringing. Obviously, all of our live events are open for you guys, and you can bring staff. We encourage you to bring staff. We just need a good head count so we have enough seats.
Yeah, let's make sure you guys go to that. And with that, let's wrap up because we're about a half hour over. It was an important meeting to start the year with, and make time to go to the live meetings, both the next ones that are coming up, and we'll be excited about having you there and having a good start to the year, okay?
Okay, thank you, Master Moody. Thanks, Master Dunn.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
See ya.
See you later.